So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Solo Leveling. So let's start the series. What is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word reincarnation? Is it the capacity to acquire new abilities that you have never had before? Or perhaps there is some connection to time travel of some kind? Our language defines reincarnation as the rebirth of a soul in a different body, but since we are only human, what do we really understand about the vast cosmic system of things? An entity that came to be known as the Absolute Being divided the light into the group known as the rulers and the darkness into its polar opposites, the monarchs, at the beginning of time, when there was only light and darkness. Since the rulers were created to defend the planet, since they were the opposite of the monarchs, who were created to destroy it because they were made of darkness, a devastating conflict soon broke out between them. The rulers begged the Absolute Being to grant them the fortitude to permanently put a stop to the slaughter and annihilate the monarchs after ages of unending conflict with no end in sight. But the Absolute Being did not respond, and the rulers concluded that the Absolute Being did not want the war to end and that their conflict with the monarchs was only for his amusement. 7 of the 8 rulers rebelled against their god as a result of this knowledge and the understanding that the conflict would never end as long as the Absolute Being remained alive. The final and most powerful ruler, Ashbourne, was the only one who stayed faithful and did everything in his power to stop them, but they vanquished him and left him for dead. The rulers marched into the throne room and killed the Absolute Being with spears as they had no one remaining to stop them from their revolution. Later, Ashbourne would discover the god's body still resting on his throne, the swords of the rulers protruding from his neck and chest. With a deep-seated sense of guilt for not being there to protect his master, Ashbourne prepared for death after accepting that his injuries from his battle against the other rulers were deadly. But before he could pass away, he learned that the Absolute Being had concealed a terrible power within his body, which he immediately used to change into the Shadow Monarch. Ashbourne returned to the battlefield to carry on the struggle, now fully recovered and even more powerful than before his altercation with his erstwhile brethren. However, by the time he returned, he discovered that it was too late, for the Absolute Being had already died and the revolt had ended. He would wonder why his master had done nothing to prevent his own death, but he would never receive the explanation because the only person who could provide it was dead in front of him. Ashbourne saw that the monarchs would lose if he didn't intervene after the rulers captured Ligia, one of their strongest monarchs. They promptly accepted his offer, as they needed the strength to cover the void left by the loss of one of their strongest. Unfortunately for Ashbourne, despite his ability to maintain the war and balance the power, his overwhelming abilities caused him to become feared by both sides, which ultimately led to 2 monarchs, Beast and Baron, betraying him and attack him with their troops. Even though Ashbourne executed Baron for his betrayal and easily beat both monarchs, his own army did not fare well and was all but destroyed. The rulers came down in front of Ashbourne immediately after he killed Baron and begged for his pardon. The rulers persevered in their plea, and Ashbourne was so overcome with emotion that he was unable to respond, even though at first he rejected their gesture of peace and angrily demanded that they kill him in order to win the battle. Ashbourne departed the battlefield to rebuild his army and seek revenge on the Beast Monarch, which allowed the rulers to ultimately defeat the monarchs and drive them into hiding. However, Ashbourne eventually rejoined the monarchs, and Antares, the most powerful of them, welcomed him back right away because the other monarchs were still severely damaged from their defeat by the rulers, and 2 of them had already been lost. Ashbourne joined the monarchs when they attacked the human world centuries later, just as they had done previously, since he wanted to discover his place in the universe and never felt at home in the chaotic world. With the assistance of a servant named the architect, he also began searching for a suitable human vessel at the same time. He looked for years without success before finding a human named Sung Jin-woo. Later on, this individual would become his successor rather than his vessel. In order to prevent the destruction of the human world, Sung Jin-woo would later defeat the monarchs. Only after the battle was finished and the dust had fallen did the young guy realize how much this war had cost him. This crazy war had claimed the lives of so many of his friends and innocent bystanders. He desired that he could make it right so that no one would have to go through this kind of suffering, and the rulers showed themselves in front of him with a mystical object called the Cup of Reincarnation. The rulers had no idea why the Absolute Being had made the cup in the first place, ages ago. The rulers replaced him as the new gods and took his equipment, including the cup, for themselves after killing him for being unkind to them. They simply examined what this cup performed, they never investigated why it existed. What it accomplished was to turn back time by around 10 years. The rulers used the cup to go back 10 years and give themselves another chance after their first attempt to stop the monarchs from destroying the human world failed centuries later, or in the present. The human world will inevitably be destroyed regardless of which side won the battle, thus this, regrettably, just served to prolong what appeared inevitable. Even worse, even though God himself made the cup, its power was limited, and ultimately the rulers noticed that it was beginning to deteriorate. The many gateways to other dimensions full of monsters of all kinds, and the revelation of the existence of magic beasts were the rulers' final resort 10 years prior to the events that resulted in Sung Jin-woo standing here triumphant before them. In contrast to all the other times they had failed to save the human race, it would only take a few years for the human world to be saturated with enough mana to endure the brunt of their conflict with the monarchs. Furthermore, the rulers would no longer need to utilize the cup if they prevailed in the conflict. Sung Jin-woo had begged the rulers to use the Cup of Reincarnation one final time after defeating Antares, the very leader of the monarchs themselves, in order to bring back all the individuals he had lost during the conflict with the monarchs. Jin-woo persisted in his choice despite the rulers' warnings that if he failed, they would be doomed because the cup only had enough power left for one final run and that no one would remember him if he did this. When the rulers saw that Jin-woo was going to handle everything alone, they wished him luck and used the cup one last time, using up all of its energy and sending them all back in time by 10 years. That was the expected outcome, at least. The rulers had never once pondered or asked why this cup was there. Not once, and as a result, they were unaware of the curse placed on the object by the person who created it. If one were to observe the death of the Absolute Being from the outside, one would wonder how he let it to occur. In actuality, his own creatures killed this God, this Absolute Being, who created the universe. Since he didn't even defend himself, it didn't seem likely. His body had just been left to fester on his own throne after being skewered there. The response to that was straightforward. The Reincarnation Cup. He created the cup to go back in time in order to find a way to prevent his own death, should the need arise, for he had always known that one or both of the factions he had created to fight one another would turn against him. And he had used the cup many times, but no matter what he did, things never turned out the way he had hoped. Either he died or everything he didn't want was destroyed, leaving him bored and alone. Thus, after repeatedly going through this, he simply let it happen, but not before condemning the very thing he had used. It was referred to as the Cup of Reversal when he created it, which explains why it could go back in time. However, once he cursed it, it changed its name to the Cup of Reincarnation and had less applications. In essence, it was the Absolute Being's method of telling his own creations, "Fuck you." He was aware that one of the sides will eventually locate and utilize the cup, extending their conflict by turning back time. Since he was no longer there to maintain its power, the cup's use would decline, and the curse he had set on it would come to life with its last use. Time did not go back as Sung Jin-woo had anticipated at that very moment, when he activated the Cup of Reincarnation for the last time. No, he was resurrected into a different body, his memories and skills sealed, just as the Absolute Being had intended for his creatures. However, the seal on Ashbourne's power would erode over time because it was intended to act on either the rulers or the monarchs, and he had failed to include the Shadow Monarch in the curse. The actions done against the person who would eventually unlock the Shadow Monarch's godlike power, both as Ashbourne and when resurrected through Sung Jin-woo, would influence the fate of the entire planet. Additionally, the residents of the village where Sung Jin-woo's new body was born were currently attacking his helpless, feeble form, which was bad for the people of the new time and realm into which he was reincarnated. This was not at all encouraging for the world. Today, Elemental Continent, Konoha, this is the tale of a youngster whose fate was a mystery to everyone, even himself. Even though the child is young now, he will grow up to be a strong leader. Only time would tell if his reign was despotic or benign. The day of Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze's birth, October 10th, tormented not just him but also the residents of the town where he regrettably ended up living. He was born on this day, and his birth made his mother weaker, allowing the monster she had locked inside of her years before to escape and start causing chaos all around. Even though his father had repelled the demon, the town had suffered great harm and many lives had been lost, which ultimately led to the deaths of both his father and his mother. Thus, this unfortunate infant became an orphan less than a day after birth. The demon attempted to kill the newborn in order to prevent any attempts to reseal him because it did not want to be sealed away like it had previously. However, the child's mother repelled the attack at her own peril, and the final words she uttered before passing away were, "I love you, newborn." In order to create a seal that inserted the demon into his kid, his father had offered his own soul as a sacrifice to the god of death. To ensure that the village viewed Naruto as a hero, he addressed his last words to Hiruzen, the former village head, but Hiruzen had no intention of listening. The man had given Naruto a quick glance before grinning avaricious. He was more interested in a weapon, a tool to employ against any and all challenges the community may or would face in the future, than he was in the words of the now deceased man. Therefore, even though he would let the boy live, he would consider it to be less than human. Since Hiruzen permitted the Konoha villagers to harm the boy in retribution for the demon's destruction of their houses and the many people it had slain, Naruto's life has been nothing short of torment. Hiruzen permitted this to occur in order to adopt the character of the caring grandfather and use the boy's allegiance to him as a future weapon. Even though his original strategy might have succeeded, he was unable to predict or plan for some events to occur as they did. Naruto was assaulted by a big group of villagers once more, like he had been attacked numerous times before, when he was only 7 years old. You wouldn't know this because the hunger he was experiencing hindered his growth. In essence, they had pulled him against his will into a back alley and beaten him severely with pipes, fists, and a 2x4 that they had broken on him from excessive use. They all smiled and laughed about how much fun they had torturing this child, and then they left him to bleed dead in that alley. However, Naruto just waited half-consciously for whatever power had been bestowed upon him, or cursed upon him, to gradually cure him while they were leaving. He didn't know that the demon he had sealed inside of him, something else he didn't know about because no one had ever told him he even had it, healed him because if he died, the demon would also die. The seal that kept the demon imprisoned operated in this manner. But today wouldn't end the way it usually did after the villagers finished attacking Naruto because, right then and there, a seal inside his body that had been kept concealed from everyone cracked, allowing the power of a hunter who had long ago passed to start unsealing itself. Mindscape, when Naruto awoke and turned to face the world, he was shocked to see that he was not in the alley where the people had just spent the previous hour beating him to within an inch of his life. This region was completely unfamiliar to him, and based on his observations, it appeared to be some kind of sewer or something. This caused him to wonder whether or not he had been thrown into the sewers, but since he wasn't going to get the answers by lying there, he got up and cleaned himself up. Now that he was awake, his primary concern was deciding which way to travel. He had no idea which way led to which because there were only two options and they both headed down dimly lit tunnels. So he just picked a path and followed it. He walked for what felt like hours, but there was no natural light, so he had no way of knowing the time. He kept walking, wondering what was at the end of this tunnel, until then he discovered what it was. He was now standing in front of a huge prison of some kind. It had a rather large seal on it and was surrounded by bars of strong metal. Given that the jail was enormous and that whatever was within was bigger than Naruto could manage, he had no idea why it was here and had no desire to find out. As a result, he planned not to tamper with it. He would proceed in the opposite direction, hoping to find a way out of wherever this place was, for this road only seemed to lead to a prison. However, he didn't realize until it was too late that a big orange tail was slithering out of the cage as he turned to leave. It caught hold of Naruto and dragged him into the prison. The tail belonged to a gigantic nine-tailed fox demon, so when he saw what it was hooked to, he screamed even more as he was pulled in. An unexpected source prevented the creature from devouring the boy as it shouted in his face. A guy emerged from the shadows, swooped through the air, and cut the tail that was limiting Naruto's motion. The man glanced at the fox demon and extended his hand, but the beast shrieked in agony. The demon's roar was immediately cut off, and it was also made to lie down on the ground, just like an obedient dog does. After the demon was in such a pathetic state, the guy turned to face Naruto, who noticed that the man's eyes were flashing a frightening shade of vivid purple. A powerful, attractive young man with black hair, gray eyes, and sharp facial features stood there staring at him. He donned a white dress shirt with a black tie underneath a black dress shirt. He also donned black shoes and black jeans. Given that the majority of his clothing was black, it appeared that this man loved the color. It seemed to Naruto that this man was dressed as though he were attending a funeral or something. Naruto pondered whether this man was a friend or whether he was going to attack him, but he finally received his response. The man sighed with his eyes closed, so this is what we have become, has it? This was not the expected outcome. To think I actually used the cup and became like this. Since this was completely out of context and he had no understanding what the man was talking about, Naruto responded, in perplexity. Who are you? Oh, the man laughed, sorry. I sort of needed a second there to sort some things in my mind. But as to your question, you are asking the wrong one. What do you mean? The man grinned and replied, you asked me who I am, but the true question is who we are. Naruto's head started to pound with an unfathomable headache as soon as he heard the man repeat those things. For some reason, it seemed as though his spirit itself was attempting to pierce his head. However, he had glimpses of a life he had not lived during that painful moment. During that period, he was known as the weakest hunter of all mankind. His dismay at witnessing numerous fatalities in the double dungeon, his seeming offering to the statue, his ascent to prominence as a hunter. Upon his recovery he was dispatched on missions to gain strength. His journey up the Demon Tower, which culminated in the Demon Baron's demise. His ascent to the top of the S-ranked hunter rankings in the world, the conflict with the kings. Finally, the use of the cup of reincarnation by him when Naruto's head stopped hurting. He looked up at the man because he finally recognized him, or rather, he recognized himself. Naruto said simply, gazing in wonder at his former self, Sung Jin-woo. To believe that he had accomplished such remarkable things. It simply infuriated him to see himself as he was now, mistreated by the Konoha people. Jin-woo smiled and added, "So you remember." "I actually wondered if you would." Naruto asked bewilderedly, "But what happened to us to make us become like this?" "I am wondering about that myself," Jin-woo admitted with a sigh. "When I used the cup of reincarnation I was told I would be sent back 10 years. Yet not only did that not happen, I was actually reincarnated into a whole new body in another dimension of all things. And to top it all off, my power was sealed away as well." "How do you know we are in another dimension?" "Because there are neither monarchs or rulers here. Trust me when I say, after being around them so much that you just know when they are around. Since I don't sense them, they are not here anymore." "Point taken, but don't you have any sort of clue as to why we were reborn like this?" "I can't think of any other explanation for why this happened," Jin-woo remarked, shrugging his shoulders. "My only guess is that whoever made the cup put some kind of hidden curse on it or something." Naruto inquired, "So what happens now?" "Why are you asking me?" chuckled Jin-woo, "since I am nothing more than just the memory of our past. This is your mind and I am just who we were. I have no power nor will I continue to exist once you leave. So it is up to you on what to do. So all those things I saw you, us, do in the past. Do I have those abilities?" "Indeed you do," Jin-woo replied in a serious voice. "Whatever magical power brought us to this point, the same one that has sealed our power for years, it is beginning to weaken. I am guessing that time is weakening it, and now that you know about your own power, and now can access it once more, that barrier will break faster than time itself would do it." Naruto, still a little perplexed about how to do it, wondered, "So how do I access it?" "That's easy," Jin-woo, who was losing himself, his mission accomplished, said, "Say the words. Say the words that you know deep down in your very being. Now go. Go and show the world the strength of the Shadow Monarch." And with those final words, Jin-woo vanished from the earth. His memories and abilities would endure in his new life even if his body would be gone forever. For a long, Naruto remained there, allowing everything to sink in. It was a little overwhelming to realize that his former strength was returning to him from a previous existence, but he would eventually adjust just like he had when he originally acquired that power. The question of what he would do with his rediscovered power then arose. He possessed godlike ability to do with the universe as he pleased, but he had no notion what he was supposed to do with it. However, he suddenly realized. He was quite certain of what he would do. Live. The anger he had felt when he initially recalled his past was stoked by that one word. He was once the strongest man on earth, defending it against a foe who aimed to exterminate all of humanity. He was now a helpless child who was neither appreciated or given a moment's joy. Not anymore. He no longer wanted the weight of some random fucker's boots pressing down on his neck. Thus, with a renewed determination to improve his life in every manner possible, he spoke the words that, as Jinwoo stated, were ingrained in his very nature. Arise. The evil power he had employed in a previous existence surged out of him with that one phrase. Within seconds of being released, the demon that had been restrained to the ground the entire time died, and in its last moments, it experienced the actual sensation of terror. The real world, when Naruto awoke and returned to reality, his body felt more resilient than ever. He questioned whether what he had been experiencing was a hallucination caused by brain injury, but he did so by grabbing a thick wooden piece of the 2x4 that had been used to pound him into the ground and using his bare hand to smash it. He didn't have this kind of strength prior to all of this, so no, it wasn't a dream. He was now strong enough to become the strongest person alive, but it would take some time because whatever barrier had initially kept his power in place was still there and was just gradually dissolving. Furthermore, his IQ had significantly grown as a result of whatever had occurred to the seal to his power. Despite being only 7 years old, he had the mental capacity of a man in his prime. This would be very beneficial to him because, in order to change his circumstances, he would need to come up with a suitable plan. Naruto responded, "Well then," and leaped back up onto his feet. His body was much more rigid than he would have preferred, so he took some time to break his numerous limbs. It felt good to crack his body as he did it. Seems like I need to figure out just what I can do at the moment. I wonder if... Fortunately, Naruto discovered a can as he searched his near vicinity for something he might pick up to test. Before sending it away and keeping it in his inventory, where he had previously kept his weapons and potions, he picked it up and threw it in his hand a few times. It's good to know that my inventory is still intact, Naruto smiled to himself, but it makes me wonder if my old gear is still in there. Because he could see what he had put up without physically seeing it, Naruto was able to connect with his inventory in a way that was similar to a mental link. Although the architect was no longer able to view the system's screen after his death, he was still able to use the storage feature. Unfortunately, none of Naruto's former equipment was left in his inventory, even though he could still use it. The can he threw in there as a test was all that was present. Well, that is a bit of a disappointment, Naruto admitted with a sigh. I could have used my old weapons. But now that I think about it fully, it doesn't really matter in the end since there are no gates in this universe. Since there aren't, there is no need for magical weapons to defeat the various monsters that inhabit them. I'll need to find a proper replacement, and sweet merciful Kami, I have no idea where to get that. But what to do now? In fact, Naruto stood there contemplating his options for several minutes. Unlike other children, he didn't have a suitable family to return to. And he didn't really look forward to returning to his shithole of an apartment. It was the bare minimum to call a place to dwell, but it had a roof, although a leaky one, and he could lay his head there at night to avoid being caught in the rain or the cold. Additionally, it had the drawback of being a location where many people who want to harm him might find him and do just that. It took him many minutes to come up with a plan of action. I need to find a quiet place to train, Naruto continued to himself, since the people here will only hinder me if they think I am getting too strong. While I may remember what I could do in my past life, I will still need to train my body to regain my strength. Plus now that I have chakra as well as the magical abilities I had back then. That makes me question just what I can do with that knowledge. Questions for later since I need a place to train first before I test my abilities. But where is there a place to do just that? I can think of one, but I don't know if I am ready to go there. Then Naruto recalled his stealth abilities. This talent effectively made him physically and magically invisible by blending him in with his surroundings and concealing any signs of his presence. He would greatly benefit from this, particularly if they ever dispatched Tracker Nin to look for him. He merely needed the right gear to protect himself now that he knew how to reach someplace without being discovered. He headed toward the village's main street with a plan in mind and the ability to carry it out. He felt his tummy growl as he made his way toward the area where the majority of the stores were located. He laughed a little since, amid all this, he hadn't actually considered getting lunch. However, it made sense in light of what he had just experienced. In order to get to a food vendor, he took a detour. On a stick, this one offered grilled meat. Like many others, the stall owner detested him and had already stabbed him multiple times. Therefore, Naruto was guilt-free when he used his stealth ability to grab a few pork skewers while the owner was yelling about his goods before he went to devour them. Behind one of the few shinobi equipment stores in this village, Naruto ate his lunch in quiet. Only the bright orange ones he had become accustomed to wearing were available, despite the fact that this was the only store that would sell him clothing. Since shinobi were supposed to be sneaky, Naruto mentally noted that he needed to change his clothes to something more fitting. It was not a sneaky hue, bright orange. After finishing his meal, he used his stealth ability once more and entered the business. Since it was one of those locations with a door and a bell above it so the person in charge at the time could hear that someone had come in, he did laugh a little. After hearing the bell jingle, he saw someone emerge from the rear area to meet a customer, but he was unable to recognize Naruto because of his ability to make himself invisible. After the man returned to the rear storage area, Naruto proceeded to a huge rack containing kunai. He started to remove the kunai from their places and put them away in his inventory after turning to make sure the storekeeper wasn't watching him. This was somewhat personal because the individuals who owned this store would constantly sell him such low-quality items, including kunai, even though he probably didn't need all of the kunai he was taking. He was only getting what he had paid for, and they wouldn't give it to him. After removing the rack, which weighed roughly 100 kunai, he turned to go back the way he had come. He couldn't help but wonder how the man in charge would account for so much kunai being taken, but he wasn't at all worried about it. After getting what he needed, he started to go in the direction of the Forest of Death. This area consisted of a sizable forest that was enclosed by a tall, metal chain-link fence to keep the animals inside. It was utilized in the different Chunin exams that the hamlet occasionally held. It was ideal for his preparation because nobody came here for anything but those tests. Although he was aware that there were dangerous monsters that could kill him if he wasn't careful, he was sure he could handle them because he had faced much more difficult ones in his previous existence. He was able to manage these creatures because they were normal and not magical. When Naruto got outside the Forest of Death, he checked to make sure no one was nearby and then he climbed over the fence and hopped back down on the other side. As he proceeded deeper into the shadowed area, he picked himself up and stopped when he had gone far enough into the woodland. Well, I might not have my gear from my past life, Naruto thought to himself, but now I wonder if my old shadows are still available. I could surely use their assistance for the future. Arise! Naruto was disappointed that none of his old shadows appeared like they usually did. Although this was awful, he kind of expected it. It was true that he had previously obtained Ashbourne's shadow army when he was granted the entire power of the Shadow Monarch, but this time and dimension seemed to be different. Even though he no longer had his ancient, enormous army of shadows at his disposal, he still had 3 that materialized out of the earth. The fox demon that had attempted to devour him was the 3rd of the 3 that had materialized in front of him, though it was much smaller than the other 2. It was still quite large, although at this moment it was no more than the size of a bear. Although it was expected that all 3 of his minions would kneel to him given that this had already occurred in his previous life, Naruto couldn't help but wonder where the other 2 shadows had come from. He could relate to the fox demon because when he used his power, it killed the thing that was imprisoned inside of him. However, he had not yet killed anyone by using his powers once more. Since the people did not bury their dead in the forest of death, he was not close to any graveyard that he knew of, so calling forth the shadows of the long dead was not an option. In order to see who he was, he ordered the man of the 2, the other being a woman with what he would concede was gorgeous hair that was dark red, like black but with a dark red tint, to raise his head. He was so shocked by what he saw that he fell backward onto his ass. Even though they can have brilliant blue or purple skin, shadows still possessed distinguishable characteristics from their life. As a result, Naruto glanced at this man and quickly recognized the face of Minato Namikaze, the notorious 4th Hokage. Since he knew where the man was buried and hadn't gone there since regaining his abilities, he had no damn idea how he had come to possess such a legend as his shadow. How? Was all Naruto could manage to utter when he saw the man he really loved kneeling in front of him, a concrete reflection of who he had been. In fact, Naruto felt bad about this and extended his hand to honor the man by letting him leave his service, but the shadow spoke to him first. Minato's shadow could only utter, S. So. Son, Naruto wasn't surprised that he was having trouble communicating because many of his previous shadows experienced the same thing. However, that one word had halted him both in his tracks and in his thoughts. What did you just call me? Son. Minato repeated, but this time she replied, Naruto. Son. All 3 of Naruto's shadows vanished when he waved his hand. Since this was not how he had anticipated the day to unfold, he wanted to be by himself at the moment. To be honest, he had not anticipated recalling a previous existence in which he had battled against godlike beings for humanity's sake prior to his reincarnation, but that was irrelevant. That tidbit of information he had received felt like a piece of a puzzle that had been missing for a long time until it was finally fitted in its right place. Now everything started to make perfect sense to him. After his power was unlocked, he gained additional intelligence and became much more knowledgeable about genetics. When he last looked, the only people in Konoha with blonde hair were members of the Yamanaka clan. He was a blue-eyed, blonde-haired child. Since he was by himself on the streets and was being attacked by their members, much like the other residents of this area, it was clear that he was not a member of their clan. In light of this, there was just one other individual who shared his traits. Since everyone in Konoha had heard about Minato's spectacular triumph over the beast, he was aware of the Kyuubi narrative. This indicated to Naruto that the Kyuubi was, in fact, the demon he had killed inside himself when he had let his strength run wild. For a brief moment, he was filled with pride since he had seemingly slain the accursed creature, something that even the great Minato Namikaze had failed to accomplish. He wouldn't give it much thought, but he wasn't sure if his possible father and personal hero would be pleased or envious. He still had a glimmer of doubt despite all of the information that had been given to him, and he needed to dispel it only for the sake of being safe. And fortunately for him, he had the ideal resources to obtain the answer he was looking for at this very moment. He was unable to ask anyone because he was aware that they would somehow deceive him. With a more mature perspective like the one he now possessed, his improved knowledge made it easier for him to recognize that he was being controlled because it was so clear. Therefore, the superiors would not be able to help him. Since, in all honesty, that was the only one he could currently take, he would follow the direct approach. They had briefly discussed seals in the little school he was permitted to attend because the teachers were constantly coming up with ways to expel him for different reasons. He was aware that clans employed simple seals to protect their dwellings. These seals were hereditary in origin, meaning that only members of the immediate family could activate them. Due to Minato's reputation as a seal master, his house has remained sealed to this day, even though the man has been deceased for many years. Naruto would next proceed to check if his contact would cause the seal to activate. He would know without a shadow of doubt that he was Minato Namake's son if it did. With a predetermined goal in mind, Naruto headed for Minato's house, though he was a little annoyed at having to leave the Forest of Death so quickly without actually carrying out any training. On his way out, he did manage to murder a rabbit and turn it into a shadow. Since he knew he would return again, being able to switch places with his shadows would be useful in the future. He would be able to avoid the lengthy trips between the two locations. If he had used his stealth ability, it wouldn't have taken him so long to reach his target, but he was thinking about a lot of things at the time, so it didn't occur to him until he was getting close to Minato's house. But as he approached, he turned it on since he didn't want anyone to see him travel in this particular direction. The house itself was securely intact when he arrived, but the yard resembled a little jungle. He might readily hide in the high grass if he so desired. As he approached the front gate, he could see the seal that kept it closed and the different traps that were part of the building's active defenses. Naruto put his hand on the seal while holding his breath, and he felt as though electricity flowed through him. Before he heard a click, indicating that the gate had unlocked itself, it had been around 2 seconds. He was unquestionably related to Minato Namake's based on this one deed alone. He hurried inside and shut the gate behind him to prevent anyone from following him, though, for there was no time to fangirl over that fact. He entered the gate, trudged through his front lawn, which was a tiny rainforest, and arrived at the front door. Since only the gate was locked and not the house's door, he was able to open that with relative ease. He entered the house he was entitled to and shut the door. He noticed that there was a lot of dust all over the place. However, it was not surprising that it occurred because no one had been inside for the previous 7 years, leaving no one to clean up after them. Initially, Naruto wanted to turn on the lights, but he restrained himself for 2 reasons. First of all, he had no trouble seeing in the dark. He apparently had amazing night vision because he was the monarch of shadows. He didn't want people to see the lights on from the outside, which is the second and much more significant reason. They would be tipped off by the higher authorities, who he was positive knew who his parents were, would figure it out, and would try to find him. Furthermore, it would not end well for him if he were apprehended because the Yamanaka clan had the power to both invade people's brains and wipe their memories. When they were done with him, they would make sure he didn't remember anything at all. He therefore started to realize the kind of house he would have had if his parents had been present to care for him. He was aware of his father's identity, but he was unaware of his mother's. He gave it a lot of consideration as to Minato's spouse, but he was at a loss because they only ever discussed Minato. He noticed that there was a big kitchen, a door leading to the basement, which he would later inspect, 3 different bathrooms, a master bedroom, 2 guest rooms, and finally a bright blue door leading to the house's final room. When he opened it up, he discovered a brightly blue chamber with painted leaves and clouds on the walls. There was a baby crib in the middle of the space, but it was never used. Sadness sank into Naruto's heart as he approached the crib. If only his parents had survived to this day, this would have been his. He looked up at that moment and was somewhat moved to tears by what he saw. Minato and his wife, whom Naruto identified as the female shadow he had called for in the Forest of Death, were depicted holding a wrapped bundle in a large mural on the room's ceiling. Since there was no head on the wrapped bundle, he could only presume that it was meant to be him. Instead, a mirror pointed at the crib. The mirror was a great addition, but his parents didn't paint a face because they didn't know how he would look when he was born. This was concrete evidence that his parents loved him, and Naruto couldn't help but cry more when he saw it. If a parent wanted their toddler to suffer as much as the inhabitants of Konoha had caused him to for the previous 7 years, they wouldn't go to this much trouble to make a room acceptable to him. However, as he stood there with tears in his eyes, he started to reflect deeply on what he had experienced, and the more he thought about it, the more he became irate. The intensity of his indignation reached a breaking point, and even then, it continued to intensify. Finally, Naruto's thoughts exploded. He didn't let out an angry shout or anything. No, he burst out laughing. His laughing, however, was not joyful or happy in the traditional meaning of the word. This was a nasty, madman's chuckle. "They stole from me my childhood," Naruto laughed out loud while fighting off tears. "They were planning on robbing me of my home, my history, my very future itself. They tortured me for years without any thought of ramification. Well, Konoha, allow me to show you the error of thinking that way. While I am not ready to seek vengeance as I am right now, give me some time and I will see this place destroyed, and when it happens I won't feel 1 single ounce of guilt as you all burn in the hell of your own making." Following that, Naruto ceased laughing, wiped away his tears, and started to obtain the first restful night's sleep of his life. 6 months later for Naruto, the last 6 months have been heaven. Given his extensive skill set that he has accumulated over time, it is evident that he adhered to a rigorous learning and training program. Even though the seal that had preserved his powers as the Shadow Monarch was deteriorating, as seen by the strength Naruto had gained, which was unusual for an 8-year-old, it was still present and did not fully realize his potential. It was the same every day. He would steal the food he would need for the day by moving stealthily around the village using his stealth skill. Even if he had the money, they would never sell it to him since they always raised the prices of the items they sold him, and even if he could afford it, they would still give him the trash they were about to discard. He therefore felt no remorse about stealing food. After obtaining the necessary food, he would return home, eat a substantial breakfast, and then descend down the basement. A huge collection of books and scrolls of all kinds was located beneath the house. Since his father was also an orphan, he learned about his family's history here, primarily on his mother's side. He discovered that his mother was Kushina Uzumaki, and that she was not a random whore, as the other villagers had been telling him for years. In actuality, she was among the village's most powerful kunoichi at the time. He started learning as much as he could about the Uzumaki, the clan he belonged to, after reading about them. He read incredibly quickly, which allowed him to finish so much in a short period of time. He had read everything in this location throughout the 6 months that had preceded it. After completing his reading, he put them in his inventory since he intended to preserve and disseminate the information later on, either with a pupil of his own choosing or by starting a family. Which path he took would only become clear with time. He had freed his parents from slavery as his shadows, to speak of his family. After reading the notebooks the two of them wrote, he realized that they would have loved him very much if they had survived to raise him, therefore he would never use his own family in that way again. Naruto was certain that there was a valid reason for his father's decision to seal a strong demonic beast inside of him, even though he couldn't fully comprehend it. This reason didn't have to do with the severe torment the villagers inflicted on him. He did discover something intriguing among all the books and scrolls while reading. Ironically, it was a token concealed within a scroll. The token was etched with a hammer and was composed of sturdy metal. The scroll contained a thank you note addressed to his mother, which stated that the token served as evidence that the blacksmith she had rescued was appreciative and owed her one weapon that had been created at no cost. Naruto put the token in her pocket since she knew it would be useful later, especially since the person who handed it to her was none other than Muramasa Sengo. When it came to crafting swords, the man was legendary, but based on the legends, it seems that his blades were also cursed. In the end, those for whom he forged blades perished brutally. Perhaps this was the reason his mother Kushina never used the token to have a blade made. He would read until midday, eat a large lunch, and then switch places with the rabbit Shadow in the Forest of Death to start training there. He ran for kilometers around the area, performed push-ups, pull-ups, and sit-ups constantly, and punched trees to strengthen his bones. Since his body no longer looked as sickly and slender as it had in the past, it was evident that he had worked his body to the bone. It was now the body of a healthy 8-year-old. Even though he trained in the Forest of Death, where numerous terrible creatures were known to lurk, he was never assaulted by any of them. Because they were intelligent, animals could recognize an alpha male when they saw one. They made every effort to remain concealed from the youngster because they believed that tampering with him would result in their deaths. Naruto didn't really care, therefore he didn't realize that this worked for him. He believed that he was simply fortunate. He learned to replicate some of the more intricate things he saw, even if he was unable to use many of the jutsu he read in the library within his home since his chakra had been transformed into magical force. He possessed no elemental magic of any kind when he was only Jinwoo, which was one of the most significant alterations with his reincarnation. For that, he had made shadows, but he lacked the skills to employ them on his own. But he did now. Although he now possessed elemental talents, he could only employ the elements of wind and lightning. He would have enjoyed fire as well, but as beggars aren't allowed here, he would accept this. His element-based magical skills were fairly extensive because he could shape it in a wide variety of ways or just throw it in different shapes, like spikes or balls. He employed it most effectively when he amplified his weapons, such as kunai or fists. He utilized what he had at the time, but he would eventually receive a better, more appropriate weapon. However, the village was experiencing some severe problems without Naruto present, even though he was hidden away from the public view and was becoming stronger. A few days after Naruto had revealed his actual abilities, Hiruzen had become aware of his disappearance. The shinobi returned and informed him that he could not locate Naruto when he asked one of the few shinobi whose responsibility it was to watch the youngster to locate him in order to plot another attack on his person. Hiruzen was perplexed by this fact since, after all, how can you lose sight of a 7-year-old who has hardly been taught how to live? He therefore gave orders for additional troops to search for Naruto and to stay away until he was located. Everywhere the brat went, his guys looked. They visited the orphanage where he resided, but they knew he wasn't there because of the upbeat demeanor of the woman who oversaw it and her intense dislike for the youngster. They searched the playground, the training fields, the abandoned buildings, the alleys across the village, and his favorite ramen stand, where the proprietors poisoned the brat on instructions from different council members, but they were unable to find anything. At this time, Hiruzen became just as anxious as he was furious. He summoned a guy named Danzo, who had been telling Hiruzen for years that in order to better control Naruto, they needed to make him a mindless shinobi tool. However, Hiruzen knew that Danzo intended for Danzo to be the only one in charge of Naruto. Despite Danzo's repeated claims that he hadn't abducted Naruto, Hiruzen had snarled at him, demanding to know if the man had actually done so. Hiruzen started to perspire a lot at this time since they had to find the brat, and they had to find him quickly. They wouldn't be able to bounce back from losing a Jinchuriki, especially the one with the strongest Biju of all. Hiruzen convened an urgent meeting with the village chiefs, all of whom were aware of Naruto and despised him as anything other than a future instrument that they could employ once he was properly shaped. Hiruzen informed everyone that Naruto had been absent for a few days and that they had to locate him. Since it was obvious that Hiruzen's strategy had failed if the brat had gotten away from them for so long, a vote was also taken at that meeting to support Danzo's plan to manage Naruto once he was located. Despite his opposition, Hiruzen ultimately lost the vote. Since Naruto must have left the town if he wasn't there, there were suddenly even more people looking for him, both inside and outside of it. Had they known that he was still inside there, in the one location they couldn't get to him. However, as so many people searched for him, Naruto gained strength and intelligence from the knowledge that was left to him. However, he was aware that his time here was running out as he exercised his body and mind. He was aware that he would never be fully free as long as he remained here since the people in charge would stop at nothing to keep him under their control. So he wondered what exactly he should do. Because they were so outspoken about it, he witnessed a large number of people rushing by him in an attempt to find him. Because he was employing stealth, he was invisible to the human eye, therefore they didn't see him. Since they were already searching beyond the town for him, he knew that he would need a distraction of some kind if he intended to flee, and it would need to be a significant one. They would send the cavalry and attempt to compel him to return here against his will if they saw him. He therefore needed a strategy that would not only divert attention but also, in some way, undermine the village as a whole, reducing the number of shinobi they could dispatch to pursue him because they would have to defend their own town instead. It was then that an idea entered his mind, and it was a sinister one. He knew exactly how to get away, and now he just needed the supplies to carry out his plan without any problems. 1 week later, Fugaku Uchiha wasn't feeling well. To be fair, though, he hadn't experienced a pleasant day in a long time, since the Kyubi attack almost 8 years ago. His clan had been the social outcasts of this region ever since that terrible beast destroyed Konoha, and the more time passed, the more he became enraged. Due to the Uchiha clan's failure to take action against the tailed beast, the community blamed them of masterminding the attack after the nine-tailed demon fox attacked. He wondered where in the earth they had come up with that because it was such a huge leap in reasoning. After so many years, this arbitrary circumstance plus the Uchiha's relocation farther from the hamlet led to a schism between the Uchiha clan and the community. Even so, some residents continued to respect Fugaku and the Uchiha clan's efforts to keep the hamlet peaceful as its primary police force. However, time and his resentment at losing the role of Hokage to Minato Uzumaki, of all people, led him to plot a coup d'état so that the Uchiha clan could seize control of the village. Just the name Minato Namikaze makes him spit in rage. Fugaku detested the man. He was well known for being a ferocious fighter on the battlefield during the Third Shinobi War, earning him all the respect and affection that accompanied it. However, Minato's single-handed use of his fucking Hiroshin jutsu to finish the war overshadowed it. Damn it, Kami. He could easily outshine Minato's work if he could only obtain that technique, but it was hidden away in the now-dead man's house and there was no way to obtain it. No one was able to access the contents of the house since the protective seals that were placed throughout the property were still in place. Instead of being that filthy orphan with no clan name to support him as he did as a Uchiha, he was meant to become the Hokage. According to his own sources, that was the case, and the only reason it changed was because the Konoha people wanted the strongest person to hold the job, and a guy who could kill so many opponents with just one jutsu was the ideal candidate. Fugaku detested acknowledging that the people were correct, and he continues to do so today. He had hoped that he would regain the position that had been taken away from him after Minato died protecting the community 8 years ago, but Hiruzen took over again, which only made Fugaku more irate. However, at least Fugaku enjoyed putting Minato's brat in his proper place. He was aware of Naruto's parents. Every clan leader did. Since his life as a Jinchuriki was predetermined as a weapon to be shaped and used any way the village saw fit, they just didn't care. Seeing the son of one of the strongest shinobi of his generation being relegated to his position at the feet of his superiors amused Fugaku. Minato prayed that he would see this in whatever afterlife there was, and if he did, he would be sobbing uncontrollably over his poor son's misery and the fact that he was powerless to stop it. However, in recent months, Fugaku had discovered that there were other members of the Uchiha clan who shared his dissatisfaction with the village's treatment of them following the Kyubi attack years prior. They were gradually persuaded to participate in a coup that would place them in charge of this village and make them the top clan. Eventually, everyone in the clan was on board with this strategy. Since Hiruzen was diverting so many shinobi in an effort to find Naruto, who had been missing for 6 months, it had taken a while, and Kami had given them the tools to keep the intentions hidden. Since today was to be one of the final sessions to finalize the strategy, the key actors were in their clan's meeting hall to have a private discussion. The young man, for whom Hiruzen had been looking for the previous 6 months, walked around the hall's perimeter and placed seals throughout the structure, but none of them saw him. They were too preoccupied with their plans to observe the young man enter the hall from an open window on the roof, sit on a beam, and listen to everything they had to say. However, they were aware when the air began to smell a little off. They were initially unable to identify it, but when the air began to turn green, they realized they had to go. However, the building's exterior ceiling prevented them from opening any of the windows or doors to escape the noxious fumes that was becoming more apparent. Despite their best efforts, the Uchiha clansmen and women were unable to escape in time, and they perished one by one from the poison they had inhaled. Fugaku was eventually the last one left, coughing hard and having hazy eyesight. However, he did notice that someone had fallen from the ceiling and was approaching him. Even with his impaired vision, he could always spot that blonde with the spikes. So this is how the Uchihas die, Naruto joked, not in some grand battle that will be spoken about for years to come, but alone and isolated by poison. How fitting of an end. Fugaku coughed out, Minatos, cough cough. Brat, as the poison was starting to take hold of him and making it difficult for him to speak. How are you alive? Then Naruto brought out a little vial of purple liquid and placed it on the ground between himself and Fugaku. Oh this, he said, sending more poison towards his nostrils with his palms as he inhaled it deeply. I ingested the antidote before I set this trap up. Do you want it? He asked. Then crawl for it like the dog you are. Being humiliated in this way made Fugaku furious, but he would handle it after taking the antidote. Before he uncorked it and drank the contents, he was able to weakly move over to it and grasp it. However, rather than helping him recover, it actually made him throw up blood. Oh, Naruto remarked with a sly grin, did I confuse the antidote with the concentrated non-aerosolized poison vial? I'm sorry. Desperate to use the outstretched hand to choke this youngster to death, Fugaku could only give him a feeble stare. However, he suddenly collapsed to the ground, face down, and perished along with the other Uchihas. Well, step 1 is complete, Naruto chuckled. Although it was true that he had created the poison, which, according to the book he read about it, did contain an antidote, he didn't need it and didn't manufacture it because there was no use in doing so. He has a total immunity to toxins. One of the Shadow Monarch's many wonderful benefits. Now on to step 2. Arise. The shadows of the Uchiha he had just poisoned to death started to emerge from the corpses that were all around the room. When their new master called them, they all bowed to him in unison to show their devotion to him after a few seconds. Oh, the irony of this, chuckled Naruto, since you all did so much to hurt and hate me for years. To see you all bowing on your knees to me is quite a sight. But enough about that. Time is of the essence here. Hear me, my shadows. I give you one simple order to complete. Leave this room, go out into the rest of the Uchiha district itself, and kill every last one of your former clan members. Spare none. I don't care if they are weak, sickly elders or newborns. Kill them all. After hearing this, the shadows left immediately through the open window Naruto had himself arrived through. He walked out the front door and started laughing to himself as they proceeded to finish his order. He was merely carrying out the lesson he had been taught his entire life, even though ordering the killing of even innocent children as he was doing now might make him a monster. He loathed everyone in this Kami-forsaken village with all his heart, thus it was completely lawful given the principles he had learnt from the people there, who taught him that it was okay to ruin a child's life if you hated them enough. He was just giving back what they had done to him since the devil that had previously been inside of him kept him alive for all these years, even though the things they had done to him should have killed him. He watched his shadows come back one by one as he made his way to the edge of the Uchiha district because their job was over. When they came back, he sent them away because they were not needed just yet. He turned and conjured forth a number of balls of pure lightning once they had all been sent away to wait for their next summons. As a result, a few items inside the residences caught fire, and the fire quickly spread. After throwing them inside a few of the now unoccupied homes, he turned around and started to leave once more. He passed someone he didn't expect to see as he was leaving. Uchiha Sasuke, when his clan was being massacred, the young Uchiha was apparently gone doing something else. Naruto initially considered killing him, but ultimately chose to save his life. Please understand that this was not a charitable deed in any way. In actuality, this was the exact reverse. Naruto has enough information regarding Sasuke. He occasionally attended the same class as the boy, and for some stupid reason, he wasn't expelled. Because he was not only a Uchiha but also the younger brother of Itachi Uchiha, a shinobi with a respectable reputation of his own, the child was conceited and thought he was the finest. Naruto couldn't hold Sasuke responsible because he probably thought he was the best because his father and mother, who are now dead, were stroking his ego. Sasuke was going to come to the harsh truth that the Uchiha were not as great as they believed and were now also dead, so Naruto could only smirk. Naruto used his stealth to move past Sasuke before he could see him. He started singing an unsettling tune in an uncanny voice because he couldn't help but make this moment a permanent part of Sasuke's memory. Death, oh, will you not give me another year? When Sasuke heard a strange voice singing this melody, he turned to look around. Naruto's voice was audible even if his stealth skill was able to conceal his presence. Sasuke's hair stood on end since the tune was somewhat unsettling to listen to, especially since he couldn't see anyone nearby. He sped up the tempo a little and went home after becoming a little alarmed at hearing that song out of the blue. Meanwhile, he had no idea what he would discover when he arrived. However, Konoha either went into lockdown in an attempt to contain the fires or observed the smoke from the burning houses. Naruto had already started to leave through the front gate. And he started along the path to a new life without ever looking back. He deserved a better life. A king-sized one. Or a monarch in shadow. The desert. You were either a huge fan of the area or you detested it with all your heart. When it came to this place, there wasn't really a middle ground, and Naruto believed in the latter. Several days had passed since he had left Konoha in search of better opportunities, which made him laugh because he had left a truly green place with trees and woods, and now he was in the filthy desert. On his first day out of his last incarceration, he happened to stumble onto a little settlement. This type of establishment was provided to provide travelers and merchants with a spot to eat and spend the night. Fortunately, there was a clothing store there, and since he withdrew the money from his house, which, although it was a sizable sum, was far from the entire amount kept in two different banks, he was able to buy some new clothes in his size. He purchased a cloak to conceal his head and some darker clothing, but it wasn't much. And although it helped him blend in so he wouldn't be seen on his way to his goal, at the moment it was merely intensifying the already oppressive heat because heat is drawn to dark hues. In addition to having plenty of provisions, like water, which he bought and put in his inventory to be stored for later, he also carried a map to help him know he was headed in the right direction. He had the option of circumnavigating this desert, but as a straight line is the fastest route to any destination, he had to go through it instead. He was detesting every second of this, which had lasted for a whole day and a half. But after a while, he noticed what appeared to be a little town from a distance, but upon closer inspection, he realized it was actually a sizable settlement encircled by a huge wall. He looked at his map and saw that, of all locations, he had arrived in Suna. Since he had no markers to look for while journeying, it was difficult to know he was approaching this location. Now that he was at a shinobi village, of all places, and one of the major 5, it was an excellent chance to get more appropriate equipment before continuing on his journey. Since he was a child, the gate guards let him entry. Really, what could a child do? If only they were aware of who they allowed inside. However, after entering, Naruto requested instructions to several locations in order to get the necessary items. He started by visiting a store that sold shinobi clothing. He had his measurements taken there, and appropriate clothing was specially ordered for him to wear. He bought himself some of the clothes he wore when he was Sung Jinwoo and went to the Jeju Islands to battle the ants. In addition to being practical and comfy, it had a hood that helped conceal his face when necessary. He was informed that it would take a few days for his garments to be made after placing his order and paying for them. He then proceeded to a shop that specializes in supplying raw materials for any construction-related needs. In this instance, Naruto required a lot of chakra metal because he intended to use it to create something. Even though the metal was pricey considering its rarity, he could easily afford it, even though it took up the majority of his available funds. He then went to purchase extra food to make up for what he had lost on the walk here, and after finishing all of that, he went to restaurants for the first time. The ramen stand was there, of course, but it wasn't a restaurant like this one. Nobody beat him to within an inch of his life before evicting him, intimidated him, or offered him trash that was hardly edible. With a kami-given smile on his face, he ordered what looked nice on the menu and devoured it with zeal. After finishing his meal and paying the bill, he started to wander around because he wasn't sure what to do exactly now that he had nothing left on his list of things to collect. He didn't know what to do in this village because he was new here. However, he did observe that several people were making room for a random young child of all things as he wandered around aimlessly. It took Naruto a few seconds to realize why this was the case, but it was an odd sight. His own village's residents had made a special effort to follow suit, and the only people who approached him were those who wished to harm him. He noticed the young, red-headed child, whose eyes revealed that he had not slept for a long time. Seeing this from a third-party viewpoint was odd. Since Naruto had nothing better to do, he chose to stealthily follow the boy in order to start a discussion. Meeting someone who shares your load is rare, and it's even more rare when that burden includes a huge demon that is imprisoned inside of you. Naruto spent the next hour or two following this young boy, witnessing much of what he went through with the isolation, but no one was attempting to harm him in any manner. Contrary to Naruto's early years as a Jinchuriki, it genuinely appeared as though the public was terrified of the child for some reason. Man, his life would have been so more simpler if only the people of Konoha had dreaded him in this way. It is true that he would live in virtual isolation and be alone, but he would have accepted the loneliness any day if it had been that way or the terrible life he was compelled to lead. At last, the child had found his way to a playground close to the enormous wall that surrounded the settlement. Children and their parents were present, but as soon as he arrived, the parents all took their children and fled the location. In Naruto's perspective, it appeared like the ideal moment to speak with him because he was alone himself. "Hello there," Naruto greeted amiably as he approached the child with the red hair. However, he was unable to continue because the child threw a sand tendril at him without even glancing at him. In order to prevent the sand from reaching him, Naruto raised his palm and used wind magic. This caused the sand to scatter away from him as if a barrier were in front of him. The boy actually took notice of this since he was now looking at him, and the rage in his eyes spoke volumes about the situation. The child only responded, "You will not kill me," before hurling more sand in Naruto's direction. Since he hadn't come here to kill anyone, that statement was completely unexpected, so Naruto arched an eyebrow. However, this was not the time to consider it. rather, it was time to defend himself. The boy launched additional sand tendrils toward Naruto after realizing that his initial attack had not resulted in a body. Naruto could only sigh at this because, in his opinion, it was very foolish because all he did was increase the wind he was utilizing to shield a larger area from the sand. Why would you possibly think that throwing more would do any better if launching sand at me didn't work the first time? Naruto asked in a tone that essentially said, "Hey stupid." The child raised his fists over his head and growled, but he did not answer with words. Naruto realized he needed to move when he felt the ground beneath him quake. Utilizing the wind he was utilizing to block the now scattered sand that had previously been thrown at him, he threw himself forward more quickly than the youngster could respond and hit him in the face with enough force to knock him out cold and send him flying backwards a considerable distance as he landed on his back. Naruto thought to himself, "Oh crap," when he realized what he had completely done. He hadn't intended to beat the man so hard, he had been acting instinctively. Please tell me I didn't just kill him. To make sure the small guy was alright, Naruto rushed to his side. He only wanted to stop the man from trying to kill him, he had no plans to kill him. Fortunately, the youngster was still breathing when Naruto knelt down to check on him. Naruto felt a strong surge of power come from the youngster, knocking him back a little before he could do anything more to help him. Naruto watched as the nearby sand started to swirl around the little child, like what he assumed to be a raccoon of some kind, but only half of one because it only covered half of his body. Additionally, the fact that almost half of one side was completely covered, rather than just one, was off-putting. This made Naruto a little uncomfortable, even though he wasn't sure whether he had OCD or something similar. As he processed all that had just transpired, Naruto sighed and thought to himself, of course, he was possessed just like me. Why didn't I see this coming? Naruto noticed that the boy-slash-monster hybrid's eyes were filled with nothing but mad rage. Then it extended its hands in his direction and hurled a real wave of sand at him. Naruto said, "Again with the fucking sand," since he was tired of the sand by now. It seems that he was already suffering from going through an actual desert of the stuff, but now a child who was possessed by a sand demon was flinging more of it at him. Fortunately, he had the means to avoid the sandy tidal wave that was approaching him. He sprinted over to the merry-go-round, which was only a few yards away, and kicked the bottom upward, uprooting it from the portion that caused it to spin. He then grasped it with both hands and felt the sand hitting it hard enough to make him skid back a few yards himself, although he was undamaged otherwise. Fortunately, he had enough strength from his training to hang on. He flattened his palms on the metal of his makeshift shield as soon as he was no longer feeling the sand being thrown at him. After securing them tightly, he used the magical electricity he possessed to hold them there. Then, he unleashed a tremendous windstorm behind him, which sent the big metallic disc toward his opponent while he was on it. Naruto hoped that the youngster, who now held the demonic power he did, would somehow shoot the projectile higher, deflecting it, as he had anticipated. The child was looking everywhere but up, so he was unaware that he was suddenly above him. Once he was at the right angle, Naruto kicked off the wrecked merry-go-round and charged for his opponent, accelerating to full speed with the help of a gust of wind. Naruto had intended to seize the child by the head and shock him until he passed out, but what had transpired was completely unexpected. It appears that Naruto's magical might was greater than any seals or chakra techniques that held the demon trapped inside the youngster since, rather of seizing the boy's head, he literally tore out the head of the demon that was possessing him. The demon shrieked in agony since its head had been actually torn from its host, but Naruto was just momentarily startled before he proceeded with his original plan to use homemade electrotherapy to subdue his opponent. Thus, holding the demon's head down, Naruto pulsed a full charge of lighting magic into the demon's head. Being right next to the demon caused it to screech so loudly that it ruptured Naruto's eardrums, but it didn't really matter because the agony was insignificant compared to the many other tortures he had endured. Naruto continued to be silent until the thing stopped screaming. The demon was ultimately, for want of a better description, brain dead after less than a minute. Because he had to expend so much energy to fight this creature, Naruto started to breathe heavily. It simply served to highlight the fact that, despite his extensive training, he still had a long way to go before he could fully recover his strength from his previous existence. Naruto did glance back to check on the youngster because the demon had been vanquished and the immediate threat was past. He was taken aback when he saw the youngster approaching him slowly, like a zombie, and holding out his hand. However, he never made it all the way because he fell face down on the ground, his arms still extended in his general direction. Naruto watched as the demon's head turned into sand, and the stream of sand returned to the boy from whom he had torn it. Nothing more happened, but Naruto geared himself for more combat. Naruto quickly left the nearby area and made his way to an inn that he had been planned to stay at the entire time he was here because he knew that staying here would cause a lot of issues, if the events he had to endure were any indication. After paying for it and entering his room, he took a glass bottle containing a crimson liquid out of his inventory, grabbed the cork and kept it locked within the glass container, and then downed the liquid. He let out a happy sigh as he felt his eardrums return to their original state of health. He had experienced a kind of epiphany while practicing deep in the forest of death. He had previously exploited the system to purchase his mana and health potions, but there was that one instance when he created an elixir to lift his mother out of the years-long coma she had been in. When he had fully embraced Ashbourne's power as his own and transformed into the new Shadow Monarch, he realized that even though the system had appeared to be to blame, he could still use the inventory. This had caused him to question whether he was truly capable of making potions by himself. He had thus looked for the right components, and lo and behold, he had succeeded in making them. His whole transformation from the skinny weakling he had been months prior to the more muscular boy he was now had been greatly aided by this. He would frequently push his body to the limit and break a hand or a limb. After a few minutes, he would take a health potion and be okay. The boy who had defeated Naruto's father showed up with almost a dozen of his best shinobi while Naruto was spending the night in his room. The guy was shocked to discover his kid unconscious on the ground after sensing that his son had let loose the monster within of him and promptly gathered the appropriate personnel to neutralize the threat. This was shocking to him because whenever his son relaxed in any way, the devil normally took over, therefore it was a mystery why it wasn't now. In order to have his son thoroughly inspected, the boy's father had his men take him to the hospital. Reports came in over the next few hours, and the more he heard, the more perplexed he became. When he slept, it seemed that something, or perhaps someone, had prevented the demon from seizing control of its vessel. He had no idea how this was happening, so he gave his men instructions to investigate more. All they could learn was that the demon was effectively brain dead and could no longer take control. Since it meant his kid would no longer be able to go on an unexpected rampage because of the demon's craziness, the father was really happy to hear this news. However, he wanted to be absolutely certain that his son was stable in the end, so he urged his men to keep investigating this. Naruto stayed at the hamlet for a few days to recuperate and wait for his clothing to be manufactured before continuing on his journey across the desert to reach his ultimate goal. Additionally, the youngster was released from the hospital on the day he finally packed up to leave. The recollections of his altercation with the odd youngster at the playground continued to replay in his semi-conscious condition. He was finally able to sleep thanks to that stranger, and Cammy needed it badly because sleeplessness had started to set in and was negatively impacting his mental health. Finding the youngster and thanking him for this gift was his top priority, and as he was leaving, he happened to get a glimpse of Naruto passing through the wall that shielded Suna. After noticing this, the child started to follow him. Since he was still their leader's son, the guards had attempted to stop him, but the child used his sand to sink them to their chests, preventing them from doing so. Naruto, a very quick walker, did ultimately meet up with the boy. He called out to Naruto to get his attention. "Ha!" exclaimed Naruto, bewildered, as he was unaware that someone of this caliber was pursuing him. "Oh, it's you. So how are you doing?" "Very well," the youngster said, crossing his arms. "I am fortunate to have seen you as you were leaving because I wanted to thank you in person." "Why would you thank me?" "I knocked you out, and last time I checked people didn't thank others for that. I am not sure on how you did what you did, or even what it was that you did, but whatever it was you did, it quieted the voice in my head that kept me awake." Now that the pieces were starting to fit together in his head, Naruto muttered, "Ah. Incomprehension. Well, I am glad that I was able to help." "You don't seem to understand the depths of my thanks," said the kid. "The thing that whispered to me was driving me crazy. It told me to kill everyone and everything around me, and without sleep I was slowly starting to listen to it. No one would be friends with me because of this. My own brother and sister avoided me because I was turning into a monster. You saved me much more than you know." "Well, what can I say?" Naruto smiled, sincerely pleased that he had previously been able to assist someone who had experienced similarly to him. He extended his hand to shake hands with the child. He let the youngster utter his own name before closing, "What are friends for?" With a smile of his own, the boy took Naruto's hand and shook it, asking, "Friends, huh? I would like that very much. My name is Gaara. Can I have the name of my first friend?" "Me," replied Naruto with a silly grin. "I am Naruto Uzumaki Namikaze. Well, while it was nice to meet you formerly, Gaara, I have somewhere I need to go. But if I ever find myself in Suna again, I'll make sure to drop by and say hi." After that, Naruto started to leave the village again, just as he had done before Gaara intervened. Gaara watched his one and only companion leave as he did so, wondering when their paths might cross again. But as he stood there, one thing was bothering him. Uzumaki and Namikaze are names. He was positive that he had heard those family names previously, but he was unable to recall where he had heard them. In order to question his father, he turned back toward the village. Even though years would pass before the two Jinchuriki would cross paths again, their relationship would last forever because of that one encounter. After a few weeks, Iron Country, at the edge of the field he had just finished tilling, a tall, slightly overweight guy stood alone. He had prepared the ground in order to plant seeds because it was getting close to the time of year when farmers would do so. To cool himself, he sipped from his canteen and rested on his hoe. He realized he would need more water after swallowing the last of it, so he made the decision to stop farming and go fetch more from his house. In order to know where to return, he buried his tool in the ground and started to walk in the direction of his residence. As he strolled, he whistled a song to himself, recalling the good old days when his family was still there to support him. He felt a little depressed at the recollections, but as he approached his house, he forced the grief aside. That didn't really work since he began to see his wife and son running about the property as they usually did as his family's memories began to become more vivid in his mind. But they weren't actually there anymore, those were merely memories of the past. He passed a separate structure in his garden, a forge where he had worked for years before permanently hanging up his hammer. He remembered clearly how he used to forge swords in the past, though, and he could still hear the panging of metal as he passed it. However, he was now a farmer rather than a blacksmith. He was a little taken aback to see a young man dressed in black sitting on his porch as he made his way around his house to the front door. He rarely had guests here. Since he didn't much enjoy interacting with people in general, it was quite pleasant. He noticed that the youngster was sketching something on a scroll, but he was unsure of what it was. The farmer said, "Hello there, young man," approaching his porch. "Can I help you?" "Are you lost?" he asked. The boy rolled up the scroll and responded, "No, I'm not lost, but you can still help me though." "And how can I do that?" The farmer raised an eyebrow in question. He was a little agitated by the child's response. "Do I have the wrong house, or are you Muramasa Sengo?" the child said. "Yeah," the now-known Muramasa replied, "but that doesn't explain how I can help you. I have heard from many that you are one of the best blacksmiths around," the child simply stated, "and so I sought you out to forge me a weapon." "Ha!" Muramasa exclaimed, truly amused by the statement, "If you already knew about me, then you would also know about my cursed blades. The same so-called cursed blades that are said to curse the wielder to a horrific death in battle. I have heard about that, and to be perfectly honest, that type of death would be perfect for me." "I'm sorry, kid," Muramasa remarked in a more solemn tone, "but I'm a farmer now, not a blacksmith anymore." "I call bullshit." Muramasa was totally unprepared for that arbitrary reaction because it was the last thing he thought the child would say to him. "I saw how you reacted as you walked by your forge, and just from a third-party observation I can tell that you still yearn to forge weapons as you did in your past." Muramasa asked somewhat angrily, "You think you know so much about me, don't you, brat?" "I know what I saw," the child replied with a sneer, "and I know what I hear. And from what I heard from various sources, you are a man who always settles his debts no matter the cost." "Indeed I do," Muramasa replied, his confusion returning. He carefully considered who he owed money to, and to the best of his knowledge, he had never owing a child a favor or any kind of debt. So why is this brat bringing it up at this time? But what does that have to do with anything? The child smiled, a smile Muramasa had only ever seen once in his life. "Simply because I think we can help one another here," he said. He remembered a red-haired girl from his adolescence, but he was unsure exactly why. "You get to break whatever oath you made to never forge again, and I get a weapon you promised my family years ago." Muramasa, who was now even more perplexed, asked, "Your family?" However, when the child produced a metallic token and flipped it in his direction with his fingers, that bewilderment merely gave way to outright shock. Muramasa caught it and gave it a quick glance. He knew it instantly. He had only ever made the one token in his life to commemorate a vow he had made to a young woman years before. "I see that you recognize your handiwork." For the love of Kami, Muramasa laughed out loud, I should have known you were related to Kushina of all people from your smirk. It is so similar that it is a bit disturbing to see. Asking, you knew my mother? I knew her a bit, but not enough to tell others about her. All I can say is that she is one hell of a kunoichi, and she saved my life years ago. But after that day, I never saw her again and I wondered why. To think that she would send her son to claim the promise I made. The youngster shook his head and replied, my mother didn't send me. Elaborate, Muramasa replied, casting a sort of analytical glance at the youngster. This had turned into a kind of puzzle, and in order to completely comprehend it, he required the pieces to be put together. Naruto lamented, she has been dead for the past 8 years, as it was still a sensitive topic to bring up with almost everyone. He never knew her, and it left him with an emotional scar from which he was unsure of how long it would take to heal. Muramasa remarked, oh, in a worried voice. He was aware that he had to use caution to avoid making the child's sad situation worse. But 8 years? How old are you? Quite simply, Naruto said, I'm 8. So what you are saying? Naruto stated, is that my mother died the day I was born, in an attempt to move on from the topic. So I never got the chance to know her in any sort of manner. Sorry for your loss. Muramasa replied, but if I might ask, who is your father? Minato Namikaze. Muramasa stammered in surprise, Mina. Minato Namikaze. He had not anticipated that. He was not expecting to witness the flesh and blood son of a guy with such a reputation, as most people had heard of his victory in the Third Shinobi War. He didn't even know the man had a wife and child because the last time he had heard that he had died defending his hometown. However, that only raised another query that he wanted addressed. Why would the son of the fourth Hokage be all the way out here in Iron Country of all places? This country is not the most hospitable to shinobi of any kind. I am here seeking a weapon to defend me from whatever the world could throw at me, said Naruto with seriousness, and given the crap I have had to deal with it only made me more prepared for it than any other 8-year-old should be. There is a story there, Muramasa observed, raising an eyebrow because he was sincerely interested in learning more about the nature of the story. Care to elaborate? Jinchuriki. Muramasa's eyes widened with shock at that one word. The fact that the son of such a notorious shinobi was standing in front of him was difficult enough, but it was even more shocking to learn that the boy was, of all things, a Jinchuriki. He had heard firsthand the terrible stories of what happened to the several ships in their communities. The cruelty they inflicted upon them, the pain, the hatred. He couldn't blame the child for leaving his house, as he obviously had, if even a little portion of what he had heard came to pass. Muramasa scratched his chin thoughtfully and said, well, that explains, well, pretty much everything when you think about it really. And the kicker to the whole situation, said Naruto, was that the higher-up straight-up lied to my face about who my parents were, so it was only by pure chance that I learned the truth and left after I saw just how far they went to try and control me like they did. So the rumors that I had heard about how people treated Jinchuriki? I am not sure what rumors you might have heard, but I can assure you that I went through nothing short of pure hell every single day while people laughed at my misery. My pain as well as my screams were a sick twisted game for them, since they would see just who could make me scream the loudest. There was no future in that place other than to live as a literal stress doll, so I left to find a better life elsewhere. And that led you all the way here of all places? Well, you are one of, if not the best blacksmith around, as I had read my mother wrote in her journal. Muramasa, who was giddy with delight upon hearing it, questioned, she actually wrote that. Occasionally receiving a praise was always pleasant. Indeed she did, Naruto, who was currently lying completely, remarked. Only that the token was a promise to have a weapon fashioned by the man later in life, which his mother had never been able to cash in, and that he was referred to as an infamous blacksmith with apparent curses to his works. However, he was aware that he needed to stroke this man's ego in order to persuade him to break whatever promise he had taken to stop forging weapons. So will you prove my mother's words as true and fulfill your promise? Well. Muramasa murmured, focusing intently on his left hand. It seemed as though the memory of his previous work were preserved in this one hand, which he utilized as his dominant hand when forging. I can't really go back on my own word now, can I? So I'll forge you your weapon, kid. But what type of weapon is it that you want? With a sly smile, Naruto threw the scroll he had been writing in when he had shown up at Muramasa's front porch. When he opened it to see what the child had been painting, he had to acknowledge that the child was capable of creating quite intricate artwork. With this level of talent, he could find work as an artist elsewhere if becoming a shinobi didn't work out. The design for the set of daggers that Muramasa wanted created was what he was examining. He was reminded of all the sets he had used in his previous life, and at first he thought of Kamish's Wrath, the strongest set, but he wasn't fond of the design. It made sense to utilize them when hunting because of their tremendously helpful magical qualities. However, they weren't very useful in a world like this one where there were no magical weapons, or at least none like the ones he had previously used, because their design wasn't as subtle or covert as his was. It turned out that the blades he wanted fashioned were a non-magical duplicate of his Demon King's daggers. He thought it was a good fit for the circumstances. Because of the bijou that was locked inside of him, which was the strongest of all of them and resembled a king in some ways, he had been referred to as a demon all of his life. Given his absorbed power, this set appeared ideal for Naruto, who had absorbed the beast when he had unleashed his sealed power. This is a rather unique design, Muramasa remarked after examining the illustration. Can you make it though? Inquired Naruto in a sincere interest. With enough time I can make anything, replied Muramasa, but the issue is that I lack the proper metals to forge these weapons for you. I had a feeling that would be the case, Naruto remarked, laughing. Then he called forth the many chakra metal ingots he had purchased in Suna. Given that shinobi could store a variety of items in scrolls and the like, Muramasa would have questioned where in the world he had taken the metal out of, but this was not shocking. Seems like you came prepared, murmured Muramasa with a grin. Well, it is a good thing that you did, or otherwise this would take longer. But if I am going to break my oath to fulfill my obligation, then I am going to need you to tend to my fields while I work. So essentially, I have become free labor. Naruto arched an eyebrow in question. Well, if that is how you want to see it. Well, I have no problems with that. It's not like I have anywhere set in mind as to where I am going after this, so I have nothing but time. Well, then this will work out fine. You are more than welcome to stay here in one of the spare rooms I have until I finish my work. Well, sweet Kami. All this time we have talked and never once have I asked for your name. Where are my manners? Naruto said, my name is Naruto Uzumaki, and got to his feet. He was being invited to enter, and Muramasa was opening the door for him to do so. Well, it is nice to meet you, Naruto. If you are anything like your mother was that day I met her, you have such a bright future ahead of you. What exactly happened that day that you met my mother? Replied Naruto. The old blacksmith had spoken about that incident several times, and he was very interested in learning what had transpired because it resulted in the man giving his mother a token that he might exchange for a weapon that he had created himself. Well, let me brew some tea and I'll tell you. 1 week later, both Naruto and Muramasa had been contentedly working on their separate projects for the previous week, with Naruto caring for the elderly man's fields and Muramasa dedicating his entire day to forging the weapon that Naruto requested be made. As a blacksmith, he wanted to make sure the design Naruto gave him was flawless because it was quite detailed. However, as they were occupied with their respective tasks, someone was approaching the house in the distance. And this particular person was only trouble. However, let's go back a long way to understand why this individual was problematic. Muramasa had a son, or rather, he has a son, but the old blacksmith has essentially abandoned him because of his past actions. It became evident that his son was bad from the beginning, and the old man's attempts to cure him were in vain. He had reflected on his life to see where he had gone wrong in parenting his son. Muramasa had been ecstatic to have a son to teach the family profession to, just as his father had done for him, when his son, Hikashiro, was born years ago. Along with his wife, he was there to love and support the boy every day of his existence. He knew his son would be a wonderful blacksmith like him because he saw the spark in his eyes as he demonstrated what he performed. Oh, how that changed with time. In the past, Muramasa's home and forge were located in Iron Country's main settlement. Because everyone who came to have a blade fashioned by him knew how good they were, he was highly respected there. People still asked him to create blades for them despite the alleged curse that accompanied them. However, as his son grew older, he stopped loitering around the house and observing his father and started to explore the village as a whole. The issues started at this point. Even in Iron Village, there were wealthy people who were not just conceited but also downright rude to everyone since they thought everyone else was less valuable than them. For foolish reasons, one man in particular detested Muramasa completely. The man desired a blade crafted by him, although he was not a warrior in the traditional meaning of the phrase. Since Muramasa's blades were intended for defense and not for display or as a piece of ornamentation in a wealthy person's house, as this wealthy jerk desired, he only made them for fighters. He attempted every nefarious tactic in the book to persuade Muramasa to give in and give him the blade he desired, but it was unsuccessful because he was too popular to pursue that path. So he took a different route. He bullied Hikashiro with his kid, who gradually weakened Hikashiro's mindset to the point where he began to think that money was everything. This led to issues between him and his father because Hikashiro wanted to become wealthy so that he could be someone and didn't want to be a blacksmith like his father. Muramasa was furious because he wanted to know why his son had changed into this person. Using his contacts and the many favors he was due, he not only discovered that the wealthy jerk was the one who had influenced his son to think in this way, but he also used them to ruin the man's family business and the family unit. When his wife left him for his brother, she grabbed everything, leaving the wealthy jerk with nothing. After being stabbed by his intended victim, he subsequently died while attempting to rob someone out of despair. In order to protect his son from any potential corruption, Muramasa then relocated his family to the farmhouse outside of the main settlement. However, the corruption that afflicted his son's mind persisted despite the removal of its source. It's really too deep to remove. Years later, at the age of 15, Hikashiro did something that led to his own father disowning him. Since Muramasa was only a blacksmith and not a higher official, he was unaware of the fire daimyo's motivation for visiting Iron Country. Like many wealthy people before him, the man had a fetish for fancy swords, so he went to Muramasa to beg the man to create him one. Muramasa told the man this after declining, just like he did with all the other wealthy jerks who wanted one constructed purely for show. The fire daimyo was furious because Muramasa refused to build him a blade, but then he noticed one hanging over the forge's entrance. He requested to purchase that blade because it was so exquisite, and Muramasa didn't need to forge him one because it was already manufactured. The fact that this man had even requested to purchase his family relic infuriated Muramasa. That blade was created by the first member of his family to pursue a career in blacksmithing, which later became the family trade. The one blade he ever mastered took countless attempts before it was finished, and it was the last one he ever crafted because he passed away shortly after it was finished. According to his son, it was now a family heirloom, and he ensured that subsequent generations properly cared for it and kept it honed. That blade had been in the family for 700 years, and the head of the household had taken excellent care of it. Even now, it remains as pure as when it was initially created. Hikashiro overheard the fire daimyo offering such a high price for the blade and devised a scheme to quickly get wealthy. Muramasa, however, had had enough of the fire daimyo by this time and had ordered him to leave. Even though he knew he would eventually get that sword, the man snarled in rage when he did. A few days following the altercation, Muramasa entered his forge and was met by a man's corpse. This was because, if you were to seize the blade, a simple seal on it would activate a well-hidden spike trap. Since it was so securely hidden, only his family knew it was there. At this moment, Muramasa realized he needed to hide his family's heirloom to prevent theft. After almost 6 months, Hikashiro had discovered the exact location where his father had hidden the blade. To get rid of the whole "money means you're better than everyone else" mentality, he had been told to work as a farmer in the fields, but that was not really working, and his desire for money had not lessened since he was younger. He therefore crept into his parents' room late at night while his mother was taking a bath and his father was still making a blade for someone. He removed the blade and opened the safe he had spied on his father to find the combination. He then proceeded to his room to pack some clothing and supplies. He knew he would have to leave after stealing the family heirloom since he knew his father would find out. He gathered his belongings and started to leave after his parents had gone to bed. His father had just returned from making the blade, but at least his parents should have been asleep. He was incensed because if his son had been grown enough to think he was ready for the world, he could have at least been man enough to tell his parents straight out. He watched his son packing up everything and realized right away what was going on. Despite this, Muramasa was about to let his son depart and pursue his own interests when he saw the sword his son was attempting to conceal. This happened before he could even wish his son success in his future undertakings. Swords were not really something that could be hidden in a bag or knapsack of any kind, and Muramasa knew exactly what a wrapped blade looked like, even with its wrapping. Since Muramasa never made him a sword and there was only one sword in the house besides the one he had just grabbed, he began to wonder where he obtained it. His eyes slitted in anger after opening in shock. Declaring that the blade was his birthright, he insisted that Hikashiro hand it to him immediately. Muramasa moved forward and reclaimed the blade from his son after a brief battle that demonstrated his strength as an older man. After his means to a large sum of money were taken away from him, Hikashiro became furious and rushed forward to try to reclaim it. Because it was clear what his son was doing, Muramasa was able to avoid it. Thus, his son wasn't the problem here. The problem was that Hikashiro's mother, his wife, had just emerged from their bedroom at that same moment. Hikashiro was unable to halt in time to avoid colliding with his own mother. She was thrown backwards by the contact, and to make matters worse, she slid backwards in the direction of the steps that led downstairs. As she plummeted down the steps, Muramasa and his son could only watch in terror. Halfway down, they heard a sickening crack, which was the moment her neck broke. As he went down the stairs, Muramasa called out for her in terror and sorrow as her body struck the bottom with a painful thud. He took hold of her body and started shaking it as his eyes continued to well up with sorrow. She had already left when he repeatedly urged her to wake up. After his father dropped the family relic in his hasty haste to reach his mother, Hikashiro, who had been devastated by her passing, noticed it beside him. So he took it up and ran past his father, down the stairs. His sadness was too deep for Muramasa to stop him. However, Hikashiro looked up as he opened the front door to go, his expression a mixture of unadulterated anger and tears, indicating that it was based in sadness. "You disrespectful brat!" yelled Muramasa, gritting his teeth. "You killed your own mother for money, and you can't even say one fucking word in return. Have you any sense of shame?" When Hikashiro heard those words, he had actually halted, tears streaming down his face. He didn't want things to go this way. Instead of killing his mother like he did, he only wanted the heirloom to sell it. "You want our heirloom so much, brat? Fine. Take it and sell the damn thing. I hope you are happy with yourself since now you not only have no mother, but you have no father either. Do you hear me, you piece of shit? I have no son." After that, Hikashiro fled out the door into the night, never to be seen again for years. However, Muramasa became depressed when he left and eventually sold the blade to the fire daimyo for a substantial sum of money. He spent his days drinking in sorrow and refused to produce another blade. He buried himself in booze after burying his wife. He remained this way day after day until one day he became so inebriated that he started to leave Iron Country in the incorrect direction rather than heading home. Bandits attacked him there, claiming to have stolen his money, but he had drained it all. They were simply going to kill him at this point, when a youthful, red-haired adolescent appeared out of nowhere and killed the robbers. This was Muramasa's first meeting with Kushina Uzumaki, a kunoichi. The woman had made a special effort to see Muramasa and ensured that he arrived at his house safely. At that point, she would have departed, but he broke down in tears and revealed the reason behind his sadness. Kushina had remained, listening to his story while sympathizing with his suffering. Since she was the only survivor of her clan and everyone else had been slaughtered, she had lost everything in the Second Shinobi War. She advised the man to continue living and to find a way to keep going in order to gradually overcome his grief until it was no longer a part of him. After taking her remarks seriously, the man offered to turn her into a weapon. Due to her time constraints, Kushina was unable to stay long enough to retrieve the forged weapon, therefore, Muramasa created a token and delivered it to her, promising to manufacture her a weapon when she returned. After thanking him, she walked away. Unfortunately, a number of uncontrollable circumstances, including being married and getting pregnant, prevented her from ever going back. She then passed away, making it impossible for her to claim her weapon. However, Hikashiro was establishing himself in the underworld, while Murmesa, having sworn off blacksmithing, found a new way to cope with his sadness through farming. He established a criminal business that dealt with a variety of issues using the proceeds from the sale of his family's heirloom. He engaged in prostitution, drug use, extortion, and more. He even joined forces with another criminal gangster that frightened the populace wherever he went, Gato. In the long term, nevertheless, that was a mistake because Gato was older and more experienced in managing a criminal operation. As a result, Hikashiro lost everything to Gato, leaving him with nothing but a handful of his most devoted troops who remained faithful to him. Thus, Hikashiro and his men were present. Back where, after everything that had happened all those years ago, he vowed never to go again. Hikashiro needed money to relaunch his illegal business and exact revenge on Gato, and he knew where to find it easily. He intended to force Muramasa to create a blade, steal it, and then sell it to the highest bidder because many wealthy people sought a weapon made by his old man. And whether he wanted to or not, he would force his ex-father to manufacture a blade while carrying his soldiers. So allow me to illustrate the current situation for you. Muramasa, who was inside the house, was contentedly brewing himself some coffee because he had not only completed the task for which he had been hired, but also that his passion for blacksmithing was returning to him. The weapons he had completed forging were wrapped up for Naruto to open when he returned. Perhaps this was an indication to continue the family business and start making blades for other fighters once more. While he was contentedly working inside the home, Naruto was outdoors, without his jacket, cutting the wheat that was ready for harvest with a scythe of all things. Given the size of the fields, it was quite difficult for him, but he enjoyed the task because it was, in a sense, a great kind of training. He had a water jug to quench his thirst whenever necessary, even if it was an excellent way to train the body while working out. The problem now was that he was just now chugging the last of it, and it was almost empty. After completing it, he started hiking back to Muramasa's house. After washing his mug and finishing his own drink, Muramasa was about to replace it when he heard a voice behind him. He didn't physically show it, but the voice that exclaimed, "Hey old man," made him leap in his head. He initially believed it to be Naruto, but the deeper, older voice made him wonder who in the hell was behind him. When he turned around and saw who it was, his anger surged to levels he had long believed he was no longer able to reach. Hikashiro, his disowned former son, was standing in front of him. "You!" Enraged Muramasa, who at the moment was unable to speak in complete sentences due to his rage. "Well, isn't this such a touching reunion?" Hikashiro wondered, laughing. Finally being able to properly express what he wanted, Muramasa replied, "Get out." It was everything he could do not to simply use his bare hands to strangle the young man. "Well, that isn't any way to treat your son now, is it?" remarked Hikashiro, pretending to grin, knowing that his own father would not simply alter his mind about him on a random basis. Not even time could erase the wounds from the fact that he had caused his mother's death. "I have no son, so get out." With a smile, Hikashiro answered, "Not before you do something for me first, Pops." After he snapped his fingers, a man seized him from either side of Muramasa and pushed him to the ground. The man wasn't a particularly good fighter, but he was strong in his own right. Furthermore, you can see why he was so easily conquered given his advanced age and the fact that the minions his son had sent to his home were only a foot or two ahead of him. Additionally, he suffered from tunnel vision, which made him oblivious to the men who approached him from the side when he was furious about seeing the one person he never wanted to see again. As he fought to free himself, Muramasa swore, "Haven't you taken enough from me? What more could you want?" As he drew a chair over and sat in front of his elderly father, Hikashiro began, "You see, I am here to get you to forge a blade for me so that I might sell it. Given your lack of forging nowadays, even with your reputation, it will sell for a lot of money because it will be a rare item. Plain and simple. You give me what I want and I'll be out of your hair. Win-win situation." Muramasa looked at Hikashiro with all the resentment he had for the bastard kid he had conceived years before and muttered, "No." When Hikashiro heard that Muramasa was not complying with his requests, he swore and shouted, "I'm sorry. Did I hear you say no?" Hikashiro then kicked Muramasa hard across the face, causing him to spew blood out the side. "Did you think I was giving you a choice in the matter? This isn't a negotiation, you will forge me a blade or else this will become painful for you, old man." Angrily, Muramasa gathered it in his mouth and spat his blood directly onto Hikashiro's face. "Rot in hell," he shouted. Hikashiro was furious despite the fact that the feat was actually rather amazing considering the distance. He insisted on having a weapon made for him for a number of minutes, but his father kept refusing, so he hurt him, being careful not to hurt his hands because he would need them to accomplish his goals. The wrapped daggers on the table were finally noticed. As soon as the minion noticed them, he informed Hikashiro. The minion said, "Yo boss," and brought up the daggers, which were still wrapped. The hilts of them were visible, but the actual design was hidden. "Look at these." Well, Hikashiro remarked in a derisive tone. This final statement infuriated Hikashiro, who struck his father in the face, causing his nose to bleed. "Isn't this a surprise? I thought you gave up forging weapons, old man. But look at you going back on your own morals, and you had the gall to lecture me on morality." A voice from outside the room that had entered the house said, "Yo old man. Did you finish up with my ord, whoa?" Naruto entered the doorway leading to the kitchen at that moment and saw a dozen or so men standing there, with Muramasa, of all people, on the ground and looking pretty battered. "Is this a bad time? 'Cause I could come back later." Muramasa sarcastically remarked, "Oh yeah," as he was unable to control himself. How can one enter a scenario like this and fail to recognize its severity based solely on appearances? It was easy to see what was happening. We are just having a party. These men were just playing a round of punch the old man in the face. Naruto chuckled as he said, "You don't have to be sarcastic, old man," adding, "I'm not an idiot and can tell what is happening. Fucking youngsters and they're not understanding." "Oh, I understand plenty," Naruto replied with a sigh, "like for all I know this is just some hardcore BDSM session that you paid for and I just came back at a bad time. I don't know what you do in your spare time." Since that was not the kind of response they would expect from a child of all people, Hikashiro, who had been wondering all along who the hell this kid was, why he was here in the first place, and what to do with him right now, just stared at him with his mouth hanging open like his minions. However, it was very funny to Muramasa, who was laughing so hard he was crying. Naruto remarked, "But all kidding aside, wait a second," upon noticing the minion with the wrapped weapons in his grasp. Given that they were weapons he had frequently used in a previous life, he recognized the handles. Since he was the one who created the designs and had Muramasa craft them, it was difficult to forget. "Are those my daggers?" Not anymore, brat, Hikashiro laughed, they now belong to me. Now leave before I decide to get violent, and trust me when I say you don't want me to get violent. So a man who is willing to hurt a child so as to steal what he wants. Muttered Naruto himself, well, that just makes this far easier in my mind. In a patronizing manner, Hikashiro said, make what easier, brat? He believed that this child couldn't possibly harm him or his troops, and that he would only suffer harm if he actually attempted to do anything. Killing you. Naruto stated bluntly. His voice was devoid of any trace of emotion. In fact, his lack of emotion, which demonstrated how serious his assertion was, would have impressed a certain Uchiha and a certain power-mad crippled man back in Konoha. Even though he was completely sincere about his intentions, Hikashiro and his guys burst out laughing when they heard this. Just for giving my men and I a good laugh, Hikashiro replied, wiping away a tear from his eyes. You know what, kid, he said, I'm going to give you one chance to leave without getting the shit kicked out of you. Take it or leave it. Naruto declared, I'm not leaving without my daggers, with the same solemnity and seriousness as previously. That is not up for discussion. With a sarcastic tone that caused the other men to laugh, the minion holding the daggers asked, oh, these daggers? The minion had a good deal of muscle mass and was rather massive. What, of all things, could a youngster do to this walking muscle mass? Well, if you are so determined to get them back, then by all means try and take them from me. Oh goody, Naruto said, his grin sickly sweet. Muramasa really shivered when he watched Naruto make that face because he had only ever seen it once, when the boy's mother slaughtered a sizable bandit group by herself. If history was going to repeat itself, this did not bode well for the guys present. A volunteer. Since the minion had not anticipated hearing that from the child, he said in bewilderment, wait, what? A vol. The minion was interrupted before he could complete his brief sentence. You would wonder, what cut him short? More quickly than anybody had anticipated, Naruto moved forward and forcefully drove his fist into the man's stomach. The man felt as though his body was bleeding from the inside out, and the force behind it made him cough up blood. Because they had not anticipated this, the others were frozen by the shock of the circumstance. Rule numero uno in the art of the shinobi: never underestimate your opponent, no matter how small or weak they might be. The man had dropped the daggers he was holding after being struck in the gut, and in a single, smooth move that resembled a lethal dance, Naruto quickly swung out one of the daggers and sliced the man's throat while catching the other with the other hand still wrapped. There was no need for him to practice with these blades. In a previous life, he had already mastered them. He just had to put them to use now. When the man with the slit in his throat fell over lifeless, blood streaming from his neck, Hikashiro and his men were too stunned to act. To get the fell for it, Naruto used this opportunity to draw the other dagger in the set and even threw it in his palm a little. At last, their minds started to completely comprehend the situation and took action. Kill that fucking brat, yelled Hikashiro, furious at the loss of one of his few devoted men. As it was, he couldn't afford to lose anyone because if he ever wanted to exact revenge on Gato, he needed people whose allegiance was guaranteed. As the guys hurried forward to follow orders, Naruto had just kept grinning. Now, his chances of victory would have been much smaller if this had been a gang of shinobi, trained ones, specifically. But considering that the men who were hurrying him were just ordinary thugs, albeit large and powerful, and they had no particular plan for killing him other than to move quickly. This directly benefited Naruto. When they advanced, Naruto threw one of his daggers at the person in front of them, knocking him forward and stabbing him in the brain through the bottom of his jaw. Pulling the dagger from the first dead man's leg, he swiftly took off the blade and flung it at him, dodging the next one's baton. The idiot's tendons were perforated, so Naruto waited for him to swing again before stabbing him in the arm. The minion dropped the baton, but Naruto then tore out the blade in such a way that the hand was completely severed to the bone. The bone was sharp due to the angle of the cut, and Naruto kicked it hard enough to stab the man in the neck with the sharpened bone stub. The fact that this child had not only murdered two of their own, but had done so in such a gory manner that they almost threw out their meal earlier that day caused the others to pause for a while. "What a bunch of pussies," Naruto remarked, laughing as he met the men's gaze. They saw nothing but death in his eyes, and their faces became white as they saw them light blue in a way they had never seen before. "You have the gall to try and kill a child, and yet you can't stomach a few dead bodies? Pathetic." Then, to get a head start on his next strike, Naruto knelt down a little and laughed. Even though he was not using chakra because his skills were now magical, the daggers he had manufactured for him were made of chakra metal, which, if infused into the blades, might improve them. And he was doing just that at the moment. He was injecting energy into his new daggers, which made them glow as they heated up. As soon as they were a vivid yellow, he charged forward with enough force and speed to break the wall behind him as well as the earth beneath his starting point. He cut through each man's neck in an instant, decapitating them and cauterizing their wounds to prevent blood from oozing from them like the first three did. The men had no chance to respond to his attack. In addition to the fact that this brat had killed all of his men, Hikashiro was so terrified that he threw one of the daggers at the end in his direction that he felt it fly past without actually striking him. Since Naruto was no longer holding it to maintain the temperature, it immediately cooled off as soon as it left his palm. When Hikashiro watched Naruto just stand there with his arm out still after hurling the dagger at him, his eyes still meeting his own with the terrible expression he had given him at the beginning, he froze in place. After a few seconds, Hikashiro produced a flintlock pistol he had concealed on him, but Naruto could see how terrified the man was by the way his hand trembled while he held the weapon. "Stttt, stay back." Hikashiro stammered in terror. "I'll shoot." Naruto laughed cynically and added, "Oh no, a gun. Better make your one and only shot count." Then, Hikashiro freaked out and pulled the trigger on his firearm when Naruto suddenly stepped forward. The issue was that his shot was completely off because his aim was terrible just now. To be honest, considering Naruto's skills, the bullet wouldn't have done much damage to him even if he had aimed accurately. "Now there is only one," Naruto remarked, gesturing to Hikashiro with his other hand. According to Hikashiro, a force that his brain was unable to understand was grabbing hold of his throat. Without success, he scratched at his throat. There were only two ways to escape Naruto's ruler's authority: either Hikashiro was not nearly as strong as Naruto, or Naruto himself stopped strangling him. Hikashiro coughed out, "You bastard," as he struggled to free himself from whatever was tightening his throat. Naruto then started to clench his fist, and Hikashiro felt the hold tighten around his neck. "Poor choice of words there," he stated in an emotionless tone. "It is not a bright idea to insult the person who is literally choking the life out of you like you are. Case in point." Hikashiro gasped out, "F.A. Dad. Help me, please." Since he was doing everything he could to simply breathe, and even then, he was barely able to do so. His response caused Naruto to raise an eyebrow because it was a bit of a big amount of information to be flung out like that, but it didn't make him loosen his hold in any way. When Muramasa was finally able to stand again, Naruto asked him, "This guy's is you, son?" and he continued to glare at his ex-son. Hikashiro gazed at his elderly father with beseeching eyes, urging him to cancel Naruto's appointment and save his life. However, he just saw hateful eyes staring back at him. Hatred for his previous actions. Hatred for the squander of a person he had turned into. Knowing exactly what was about to happen, Muramasa muttered, "I have no son," as he left the kitchen. Hikashiro was still his blood, and he couldn't bear to see his death with his own eyes, even if he had disowned his only kid for his previous deeds, even after acting as he did and attempting to use threats to get him to manufacture a weapon for him. He couldn't see this fake die, even though he knew the kid he loved and raised was long dead. Hikashiro didn't cry a tear of remorse until he watched his father leave the room, leaving him to face his destiny. He was aware that he deserved the outcome. This served as retribution for the lives he had destroyed through his illicit business ventures, the murder of his own mother, and most importantly, the irreparable humiliation of his family. "Dad, please, forgive," was all he could say as Naruto completely squeezed his fist, breaking Hikashiro's neck and permanently muting his voice. His body hit the floor with a loud thud as he finally released Hikashiro. After that, Naruto went to locate the elderly guy and put his freshly manufactured weapons in his inventory. Outside, he discovered him gazing into the distance from a chair on the front porch. Naruto sat down near the man, but not next him. After a tense minute of silence, Naruto stated simply, "So, is there something you wish to talk about?" Muramasa just responded with a grunt. "Oh, come on now," replied Naruto with seriousness, "let us help each other here. You have a troubled past, and I have one as well. We can comfort one another by talking it out given we are basically the same in this situation." After a long minute of contemplating whether or not Naruto should really talk about his background, Muramasa responded, "Fine." At the end of the day, when the sun had finally set, the two of them felt better since they had finally gotten so much off their chests. They had spent that time discussing their pasts. 2 weeks later, a peak with a view of the capital city of Fire Country perched atop a hill, Naruto gazed down at the city below. He had a lot on his mind at the moment, including the need to exercise caution because, of all places, he was back in Fire Country. He still laughed at what transpired when he told Muramasa that he had a very valid cause for being here. Weeks earlier, he had said, "Where will you go now?" As he prepared to leave the old blacksmith's house, Naruto declared, "I intend to go and settle down for a few years so as to gather my strength." "But you seem fairly strong as you are." Naruto laughed and replied, "That's true, but since it's me against the world, I'll need more to survive." "Well, there is no need for theatrics, boy," Muramasa added, laughing as well because, although he had heard that expression before, nobody actually had to face reality. "I am being serious, old man," Naruto said, "because, for whatever reason, all 5 villages will want me dead because of my relationship to my father alone. Kumo will want me to be a stud to rape and create more of my own clan for them to train and use as soldiers while I get no say in their lives. Kiri will want to kill me because they hate bloodlines in the civil war they are going through. Suna is an ally of Konoha, and they will do everything in their power to make me submit. My life was nothing short of hell before I left. but they will make their previous actions seem insignificant if they ever caught me again. Muramasa grinned and added, "Well, I wish you luck in your future endeavors then. I'm sure you'll hear about me in the future, with some things being sooner than you think," Naruto remarked, grinning on his own. "Thanks, old man. Is it worth my while to inquire what you mean by that?" Muramasa lifted an eyebrow in question. "Nothing much," said Naruto, "I just need to see two famous people before I settle down. Don't worry about it, I'm sure you'll hear about it." "I'm a bit concerned by that," Naruto responded, still. "Don't worry about it," and then he waved his hand to go. As he had informed Muramasa, he was to meet one of the two people he had mentioned. Although you might think that he was here to meet a friend or ally who was mentioned in either of his parents' journals, which he read during the 6 months that he was withdrawn from society, that was not the reason for his visit. The person he was seeing was not a friend. He was as distant from it as it could be. However, Naruto had to keep his appointment, and it would be considered impolite to be late. Additionally, the fire daimyo himself is not kept waiting.